Today on The Real Story, Election Day is mere days away, and we are highlighting one of the races garnering national attention, the race for U.S. Senate. It pits sitting U.S. Senator Richard Blumenthal against Republican challenger Leora Levy. Today, both candidates are here in our studio. They're going to lay out their platforms and vie for your vote. It's all today on The Real Story. Good morning, and thanks for joining us on The Real Story. I'm Jen Bernstein. We are days away from those polls opening, and a lot is at stake. And one of the most powerful positions on your ballot is a U.S. Senate seat. Senator Richard Blumenthal has been in that seat since 2011, and he hopes you vote him in again for a third time. The seat is elected every 6 years. Senator Blumenthal facing Republican Leora Levy. The GOP candidate hails from Southern Connecticut and is a Republican National Committee member. Fireworks flew when the two debated last week, and today both candidates are here with us to explain their platforms and give one final pitch to voters. Our goal today is to point out the differences between the two candidates so that you can make your own decision about who you will vote for on Election Day. And in this race, the two candidates are very different. So we start our first segment with Senator Richard Blumenthal, who joins us in studio. Good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Jen.
Okay, so 2011, more than 10 years in this seat. What more do you think you can do for Connecticut in Congress?
You know, Jen, what I've seen over these 12 years, and in fact, as Attorney General before I had this job, is that all too often special interests get their way. And as Attorney General, and now as a U.S. Senator, I've worked hard to stand up to those special interests, big and powerful as they may be. And now more than ever, as families struggle with rising costs that are crushing them, and as we have reproductive rights and even our democracy at stake, I want to continue working for the people of Connecticut, lowering costs, cutting taxes, protecting Social Security, and making sure that we restore women's rights to make their own health care decisions. And we need to promote more manufacturing in our state. The CHIPS and Science Act was a good beginning, but we need to bring back the supply chain from China so we manufacture more here, especially semiconductors, create jobs and careers for people, provide skill training, serve our veterans. There's a lot to do here, and I've been active in all of these areas. My opponent has actually opposed many of those measures, such as bringing down the costs of pharmaceutical drugs.
Again, you guys have very different stances on things. In fact, your opponent has consistently wanted to pair you with President Biden's policies, calling you a rubber stamp for the president. Your stance on that? Where do you think you align with President Biden?
I think the people of Connecticut know that I always put them first. I always keep uppermost in my mind what is right for Connecticut, and frankly, always seek bipartisan solutions. So take the infrastructure program. I'm proud that I work with Republicans and President Biden to bring back $4 to $5 billion to Connecticut to reconstruct our roads and bridges and railroads. I'm proud of the fact that we cut taxes for the middle class. The child tax credit put thousands of dollars in people's pockets. I'm proud of the fact that we lowered pharmaceutical drugs and capped the costs for seniors. I stood up to the pharmaceutical drug companies and made sure that our seniors get more drugs at lower costs. President Biden supported those measures. I did it because it was right for the people of Connecticut. And likewise, talking about gasoline prices, I challenged President Biden to release product from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. He did. Prices headed down. I've urged that more product be released from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve and that the federal gas tax be suspended, and maybe most important, that there be a windfall profits penalty on those big oil companies that are making quadruple, some of them, but double most of them, what they did last year. Their net income is expected to reach $4 trillion. They are profiteering. And I want some of that money to go back to consumers in rebates. My opponent has opposed all of those measures. President Biden has supported all of them, but I will differ with President Biden when it's right for the people of Connecticut.
The GOP's goal has been to really blame inflation, which is on so many of your minds at home, on Democratic policies, specifically Biden's policies. What's your take on that? Could inflation have gone a different way if certain policies were in place?
Well, first let's face the stark economic fact. Inflation is a global phenomenon. Inflation in the United Kingdom is far higher than in this country. Inflation is the result of supply chain issues, the war in Ukraine, disrupting world markets for grain as well as gasoline, and of course, recovery from the pandemic. A lot of businesses in Connecticut and around the country can't find people to fill jobs, which increases costs for them and in turn causes inflation. But let's be very real. There are these crushing costs that are affecting people. I've seen it as I go around the state of Connecticut, in people's homes, in their meeting places, at the workplaces. And we need to do more about inflation. That's why I have proposed renewing the middle class tax cut through the child tax credit. Republicans opposed it, otherwise we'd have it now. My opponent has never supported it and in fact opposed the legislation that included it. I think we can extend those caps on out-of-pocket costs for pharmaceutical drugs. We stood up to the pharmaceutical drug industry. Why not give everyone that kind of benefit? Negotiations for Medicare drugs. We fought for decades to make it happen. Finally, it has, and we ought to extend it even further. And the kinds of measures that we can achieve through other steps, not only the bringing back of the supply chain, but also enabling more skill training so those jobs can be filled and so that products can be manufactured right here in Connecticut, in America, with American workers, providing American jobs and careers.
I want to make sure we get to public safety because there is an ad running saying that you defunded the police. And so I know you talked about this in the debate last week, but tell us what your stance is on police and the future of policing.
The claim that I supported defunding the police is absolutely false, dead wrong. In fact, on any number of occasions, whether it is officially in the Senate record, and we have citations for you if you'd like them, or at rallies in the wake of the George Floyd murder, all around the state, I said we may need some reforms, but not defund the police. On the contrary, we should provide more resources to support the police, and that's what I have done. I brought back $45 million to fund more equipment, training, and numbers of police to the state of Connecticut alone. I supported a bipartisan measure more than a year ago, not an election year, supported by Republicans as well as Democrats to fund 100,000 cops across the country. I supported a bipartisan measure, in fact, to penalize any city or town that defunded the police, going contrary to that claim that I was for defunding the police. On the contrary, I respect police. I worked with them as the chief federal prosecutor for Connecticut, the United States Attorney, as well as Attorney General for 20 years. I think we owe them more respect and support. Of course, we need to hold them accountable when they cross the line, as in the George Floyd murder. The police themselves wanted accountability there. But support for the police is deeply ingrained in my positions throughout the years, and that claim is absolutely false.
Let's talk about age right now. You are 76 years young. We know you keep a very full schedule because we see it in the newsroom all the time. But a Senate term is 6 years, which is a long time. You'd be 82 by the end of it. Do you intend to stay in your seat the entire time, and do you have the stamina for it, for people out in our audience?
The people of Connecticut are going to make a decision about who their next senator is going to be. I can tell you I'm not slowing down. And people who know my lifestyle and my work style would be surprised by the notion that I would slow down. I expect to fulfill my term, God willing. And if you have any doubt about it, you should ask maybe some of my adversaries, like the big oil companies, or the big pharmaceutical companies, or the big tech companies, whether they think I'm slowing down and going easier on them. I want to fight for the people of Connecticut. And if people in Connecticut want change, I want change too. I want to renew those middle-class tax cuts. I want to protect a woman's right to determine her own health care decisions. I'm the only one in this race who will restore a woman's right to choose. My opponent has said and told former President Trump that she will always have his back. I will always have Connecticut's back. You can't have Donald Trump's back and have Connecticut's back. To be 100% for Donald Trump is 100% wrong for Connecticut. That would be a big change in the wrong direction for Connecticut. And her 51st vote, she called it a reliable Republican vote, would put Mitch McConnell in charge, and he has opened the door very clearly to a national ban on abortion. That would supplant Connecticut's law.
Would you support federal legislation codifying it? I would assume that you would. Would there be any limits to abortion in that, or what would be the limitations in your opinion?
Jen, not only would I support it, I wrote the federal law, Women's Health Protection Act, 10 years ago, when overturning Roe v. Wade was pretty much unimaginable. I also helped to write the law here in Connecticut that protects it in our state statutes, and the federal law that I've written would pretty much take Roe v. Wade, just as we did in the state of Connecticut. Since the early 1990s, it's worked well here to protect a woman's right to make these fundamental personal health care decisions. I trust women to make those decisions. My opponent does not. And I want them to have the security of knowing their decisions will be respected. And so Roe v. Wade and our state statute and this federal statute all would provide that states could, in effect, impose some restrictions on late pregnancy abortions, taking account of the health and life of the woman.
So the states would individually have to say what they thought late-term abortions would have to look like. They could put some limitations in.
The statute contemplates the Roe v. Wade standards.
Okay, got it.
Existing up until the Dobbs decision when the Supreme Court struck it down. And I really think, having listened to 3 Supreme Court nominees come before the United States Senate saying they would respect the Roe v. Wade standard and precedent, and then at the first opportunity, absolutely rip it up, I want to make Roe the law of the land.
Okay. U.S. Senator Richard Blumenthal in studio here for The Real Story. We really appreciate you coming in just a few days before Election Day. Thank you. All right, coming up on The Real Story, we have Leora Levy in coming up, Republican challenger, hoping to unseat Senator Richard Blumenthal in Congress. She's going to join us live in studio as we ask her the questions that you want answered before casting your ballots. We'll be right back.